For 30 years, the rest of the world treated Mexico like a formality. Show up, hand them their heartbreak in the round of 16 and send them home. 7 straight tournaments ended at exactly the same door. But there is a 17-year-old kid breaking records that once belonged to Pelé. The formality has teeth again, and good luck with that. To understand why the rest of the planet should be sweating in 2026, you have to go back to the only 2 times Mexico ever looked like a giant. Both happened at home. That is not a coincidence. That is the whole story. In 1970, Mexico hosted a World Cup for the first time and used it to introduce itself to the sport. Under Raúl Cárdenas, El Tri dismantled El Salvador 4-0, still the biggest win in the country's entire World Cup history. They navigated a difficult group that also contained the Soviet Union and Belgium and came out the other side intact. The tournament itself belonged to Pelé's Brazil in the end, and Mexico's run died in the quarter-finals against Italy. But something had shifted underneath the result. The world stopped seeing Mexico as a country that happened to play football and started seeing an actual football country, one with a culture and a hunger behind it. Then came 1986, and this is where it gets heavy. Colombia had been awarded the tournament and pulled out, so Mexico stepped in to save it. Months before kickoff, a devastating earthquake tore through Mexico City and killed thousands. Suddenly, the World Cup stopped being a sporting event and became something closer to a wake with a scoreboard. A grieving nation needed something to believe in, and a Yugoslav coach named Bora Milutinovic handed it to them. El Tri topped their group. In the round of 16 against Bulgaria, Manuel Negrete launched himself sideways and volleyed in a scissor kick that people still describe in religious terms 40 years later. Mexico marched to the quarter-finals, ran into West Germany and lost on penalties. Of course they did, so notice the pattern. The 2 greatest moments in the history of Mexican football both happened on Mexican soil and both died in the last 8. Home turned them into kings. It also quietly built them a ceiling and locked the door above it. Remember that ceiling. It becomes the entire point later. After the home tournaments, Mexico became the most reliable tease in international football. Always there, always dangerous, always gone by the second weekend. They qualified for everything. They survived nothing. In 1994, they lost on penalties to Bulgaria in the round of 16. Painful, but almost forgivable, since Bulgaria went on to become one of the genuine stories of that World Cup. In 1998, Luis El Matador Hernandez dragged them to a famous comeback draw against the Netherlands, the kind of performance that makes a whole nation whisper that this is finally the year. It was not the year. Germany ended them in the round of 16, right on schedule. Then 2002, which still leaves a mark. Mexico topped their group ahead of Italy. They looked ready to finally break through, and then they lost 2-0 to the United States in the round of 16. Losing to Germany is a tragedy you can live with. Losing to the neighbour who calls the sport soccer is a personal insult that follows you to every family dinner for the rest of your life. 2014 in Brazil might be the cruelest of all of them. Guillermo Ochoa produced one of the great goalkeeping performances in World Cup memory to hold the host nation to a goalless draw, the kind of night that turns a man into a legend. Then in the round of 16, Mexico led the Netherlands late, and Arjen Robben went down in the box like he had been shot by a sniper in the upper deck. The referee bought it. Klaas-Jan Huntelaar buried the penalty in stoppage time. The phrase "no era penal," it was not a penalty, became a permanent national grievance. Somewhere right now, a Mexican grandfather is still yelling it at a television that did nothing wrong. In 2018, they walked out and beat the defending champions Germany 1-0, with Hirving Lozano scoring a goal so violent that monitoring stations reportedly picked up seismic activity from fans jumping in unison across Mexico City. An entire country physically shook the earth. And then, faithful as a sunrise, Mexico exited in the round of 16. 7 tournaments in a row, the same door every time. The curse did not even need a villain, it just needed a calendar. If the round of 16 was purgatory, 2022 was the basement underneath it. In Qatar, under Gerardo Tata Martino, Mexico looked like a team that had never been formally introduced to itself. No identity, no shape, no spark, no clue. For the first time since 1978, El Tri failed to even escape the group stage. To understand how far that fall went, you have to know what years they were suddenly sharing a shelf with. In 1930, at the very first World Cup, Mexico lost all 3 games and shipped 13 goals. In 1978, they lost every single match, including a 6-0 demolition by West Germany that supporters spent decades trying to drink away. For nearly half a century, those 2 campaigns were the agreed upon rock bottom, the disasters every Mexican fan prayed would never be matched. In 2022, they matched them. One of the proudest qualification streaks in the entire sport, an unbroken run dating back generations, ended in a cloud of absolutely nothing. There was no famous robbery to be angry about, no last-minute dive, no villain to point at. The team simply was not good enough, and worse, did not even look like it belonged. The connection between the team and the country did not just weaken, it snapped clean in half. And the fans did the most dangerous thing a fan base can possibly do. They stopped being angry. Anger means you still care, still expect, still believe the next tournament owes you something. Mexican fans skipped straight past anger into a flat, exhausted silence. They simply stopped expecting anything at all. That is the hole Mexico was standing at the very bottom of when the rebuild began. Now watch how they climbed out of it. When a building is on fire, you do not call an architect. You call the guy who has a habit of running into burning buildings and walking back out. Mexico called Javier Aguirre. This is Aguirre's 3rd spell in charge of the national team, and his entire reputation is built on one specialty, walking into chaos and dragging order out of it by the collar. He inherited a squad with 0 confidence and started rebuilding it from the foundations up. And the key word is rebuild, not patch. This is no longer a team clinging to aging legends and praying. It is a handover between 2 generations happening in real time, hard-earned experience on one side, fearless young blood on the other. Veterans like Edson Alvarez and Raul Jimenez still set the standard, while younger names like Gilberto Mora and Obed Vargas pour fresh energy into the squad. For the first time since the collapse, fans had a reason to look up. The proof arrived at the 2025 Gold Cup. Mexico won the entire thing for a record 10th time, and they did it the most satisfying way imaginable, by beating the United States 2-1 in the final. Raul Jimenez scored the equaliser. Captain Edson Alvarez scored the winner late, and walked off with the tournament's Best Player award. After the embarrassment of 2022, that trophy was not just silverware in a cabinet, it was a pulse. But this is Mexican football, so nothing is ever allowed to be simple. Heading into the home World Cup, the Federation and the Liga MX clubs went to war over when domestic players had to report to camp, with several clubs still buried in playoff matches, and reports that anyone failing to show by a deadline could lose their squad spot entirely. Fans called it exactly what it looked like, another telenovela with the cameras conveniently rolling at the worst possible moment. Underneath that drama sit older, deeper wounds. The league scrapped promotion and relegation, a decision a huge chunk of supporters blame for quietly killing the competitive edge, since no club has anything left to fear. Then the injuries arrived, with the goalkeeper Luis Malagon and midfielder Marcel Ruiz both fighting fitness right when the squad needed stability most. And Santiago Jimenez, fresh off a glamorous move to AC Milan, slammed into a wall of poor form that split the fan base down the middle over whether he even deserved a starting spot. So no, the house is not fully fireproof, but for the first time in years, it is at least standing upright. A team that actually wants to scare people needs a spine. Mexico finally has grown one. It starts with Raúl Jiménez, 34 years old and somehow the most reassuring man in the entire squad. Years ago, he suffered a head injury so frightening that plenty of people quietly assumed his career was finished for good. He never got the memo. He kept scoring, kept holding the ball up with his back to goal, kept dragging defenders out of position so the runners around him had somewhere to go. He is also one of the calmest penalty takers Mexico has ever produced, which, given this country's blood-soaked history with penalties, feels a little like the universe finally mailing in an apology. Right in front of the defence sits Edson Alvarez, the captain and the heartbeat. Since moving to Fenerbahce, he has grown into a genuine leader, the kind who bleeds for the badge, fights for every loose ball, and shields the back line like the result is a personal grudge. When he drops between the centre-backs during the build-up, the full-backs are free to fly up the pitch. He is the engine that lets everybody else attack. Behind him, the partnership of Johan Vázquez and Cesar Montes has quietly become the part of this team the fans trust the most. Vázquez sharpened his game in Italy with Genoa into a calm, composed, modern defender, the kind Mexico has been begging for. Montes brings the physical aggression and the noise and the emotional leadership. Together they give El Tri something it has wanted for a decade, a back line that does not flinch when the lights get bright. And the attack has teeth beyond the veterans. Julian Quinones brings raw explosiveness and direct power off the wing, the ability to manufacture a chance out of absolutely nothing, which is exactly the trait Mexico has lacked for years. Behind them sit the unglamorous, underrated workers, the Roberto Piojo Alvarados who press for 90 minutes and track back and do all the invisible labour that never makes a highlight reel but wins actual football matches, and the flexible defenders like Israel Reyes, who let Aguirre shift shapes mid-game without exposing anyone. And then, in goal, the ageless Guillermo Ochoa is chasing a 6th World Cup, something almost nobody in the history of the sport has ever managed. You barely hear his name for 4 straight years, and then the World Cup arrives and he transforms into one of the best goalkeepers on the planet, as if the man only exists during the tournament itself. So this is no longer a soft team you can bully, but the spine is not the thing that should keep the favourites awake at night. That would be the kid. On October 14th, 2008, in Tuxtla Gutierrez, Chiapas, Gilberto Mora was born directly into football. His father had been a professional, so the game was already in the blood before the kid could walk. What nobody could have predicted was how violently fast it would surface. Born, Tijuana handed him a first-team debut at 15 years old. He responded by becoming the youngest goalscorer in Liga MX history at 15 years and 320 days. Back home they started calling him El Bombero, the firefighter, because whenever his club was drowning, he was the one who came sprinting in to put the fire out. Youngest. At 16, he was already pulling on the senior national team shirt. At the 2025 Gold Cup, he started knockout games, created chances and helped Mexico lift the trophy. In doing so, he became the youngest player ever to win a senior continental championship, a record that had previously belonged to names like Lamine Yamal and Pelé. Read that sentence one more time, slowly, because teenagers do not casually end up sharing a record page with Pelé. Youngest. Then came the 2025 Under-20 World Cup, where Mora looked like a grown man who had wandered into a youth tournament by mistake. 5 goal contributions in 5 matches against the best young players alive. His masterpiece came against Spain, where he scored, and then in the 85th minute, with Mexico desperate for something, struck a clean volley to rescue them yet again. The firefighter, right on schedule, masterpiece. And finally, 2026. At 17 years and 240 days, Mora became the youngest Mexican ever to appear at a World Cup, breaking a record that had stood for nearly a century. He did it at the Estadio Azteca, the same cathedral that once hosted Pelé and Maradona in their prime. He was, by a margin of 6 days, just barely older than Pelé had been at his own World Cup debut. He was the single youngest player in the entire tournament. Youngest. When Aguirre sent him on, opposing defenders did the math, looked at the 17-year-old, and sent 3 grown men to surround him. He did not hide. He kept demanding the ball, kept slipping clever passes into impossible gaps, kept dragging the whole Mexican attack to life around him. Scouts in Spain have started calling him the Mexican Pedri. Barcelona, through their sporting director Deco, are reportedly watching every single touch he takes. Demanding, a teenager who plays the game several seconds ahead of everyone else on the pitch, on home soil, in a World Cup. That is not a prospect anymore. That is a problem with a birth certificate. Problem. Here is the part that should genuinely worry the favourites. Worry. The 2026 World Cup is overflowing with young talent. Lamine Yamal arrives at 18 already looking like the next best player on earth. There is Paris Saint-Germain's Desire Doué, Spain's Pau Kubasi, Turkey's Arda Güler and Kenan Yildiz, Brazil's Endrick, an entire generation of teenagers ready to take this tournament hostage. And Gilberto Mora belongs in that exact conversation. A lot of people dismiss him purely because he plays his club football in Liga MX. Those same people conveniently forget he already broke a record once held by Yamal himself. Now stack everything together and look at the shape of it. A fixer on the touchline who specialises in organising the disorganised. A spine of Jimenez, Alvarez, Vasquez, Montes and Ochoa that refuses to break. A generational teenager who treats pressure like a toy. And then the single most important variable of all, the one nobody in the bracket can plan around, the venue. Because the entire recorded history of Mexican football screams one thing, loudly and repeatedly. When Mexico plays at home, Mexico becomes a genuine threat. 1970, the quarterfinals. 1986, the quarterfinals. Their 2 best tournaments ever, both staged in front of their own roaring people. That famous Quinto Partido, the 5th game, the quarter-final that has haunted this country for 40 long years, has only ever felt truly reachable on home soil. And now, after all of it, they are home again, with the deepest spine in a decade, and a kid who plays the game in fast forward. So picture the whole thing from the other side of the field. You drew Mexico. You now have to walk into a stadium where the celebrations literally register on seismographs against a team specifically built to frustrate and suffocate you, with a fearless 17-year-old running directly at your defenders like he has already read the script. The team the entire planet used to casually pencil in for a polite round of 16 exit is suddenly the one nobody sane wants anywhere near their half of the bracket. Could it all still collapse spectacularly? Absolutely. This is Mexico. The telenovela airs a brand new finale every 4 years, and it almost always ends in tears and recrimination. The injuries could pile up. The federation could trip over its own feet. The kid could get kicked off the park by a cynical veteran defender. None of that would surprise anyone who has watched this team for longer than a decade. But for the first time in a very long time, the dread does not belong to the Mexican fans. It has quietly been handed across the field to whoever has the misfortune of drawing them. For 2 World Cups, the world learned the hard way that Mexico at home is a completely different animal than it spent 40 years comfortably forgetting. In 2026, it is about to get a brutal refresher course taught by a fixer, a spine of survivors, and a 17-year-old who is already rewriting Pele's record book in real time. The round of 16 curse might still win in the end. The chaos behind the scenes might still swallow the whole thing, but pretending Mexico is a formality, an easy 3 points, a name to tick off on the way to the quarterfinals, that entire era is finished. The rest of the planet has a serious Mexico problem. Most of them just do not know it yet. If you want the full breakdown of who actually lifts this World Cup, and exactly where Mexico's run really ends, watch this next. And do El Tri one small favour. Subscribe before the Azteca makes you do it anyway.